Hello, family. Thanks for journeying with me on another Sunday. Today's reading comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, verse 21 through 28. And as it reads, "At that time, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman of that district came and called out, 'Have pity on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon.' But Jesus did not say a word to answer her. Jesus' disciples came and asked him, 'Send her away, for she keeps calling out after us.' And he said in reply, 'I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.' But the woman came and did Jesus homage, saying, 'Lord, help me.' He said in reply, 'It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs.' She said, 'Please, Lord, for even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters.' Then Jesus said to her in reply, 'O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish.' And the woman's daughter was healed from that hour." Powerful reading as they all are, but a bit of a strange reading, a bit of a mysterious reading, because we're typically used to somebody coming to Jesus and asking for healing, and Jesus prays with them and heals them. In this, we have a little bit of a back and forth where Jesus seems to be maybe standoffish or even rude or ignores the woman. So let's dig in and see if we can't come to some conclusions about what's going on here. So Jesus withdraws to Tyre and Sidon, and these were Gentile areas. And typically, Jews would never go up into this region. And this is actually, we're over halfway through the Gospel of Matthew. And this is the first time that Jesus goes up into this particular region of Gentiles. He's always staying in the Israelite area. And Matthew tells us that this isn't just a woman, this is a Canaanite woman. And that would have had, drastic implications of the Canaanites. They were the enemies of Israel in the Old Testament. They actually occupied the land that is now Israel, where Joshua took them into the promised land, which was occupied by the Canaans. And they essentially represented wicked living and immorality, and they were considered unclean Gentiles. And that's why Jews wouldn't go into this unclean area and mix and be around these unclean, pagan, wicked, immoral people that opposed God and his laws. Right? But this woman's different, because she sees Jesus and she cries out, and she obviously got word of, hey, there's this prophet, maybe he's the Messiah, but he's doing miracles, and he's on his way up here. And she gets word that he's in the land, and that Jesus is in this territory, and she's desperate. Her daughter is suffering. And mothers and fathers know that they'll do anything for their children who are suffering. So she comes and she humbles herself. She's not part of the Israelites, yet she cries out, "Lord, Son of David, have pity on me." This is a messianic title. And this is a bit strange because so many Jews don't recognize Jesus as a Messiah. Many Jews are not calling Jesus Son of David because they don't believe in him. But here we have a Canaanite woman outside of Israel that believes, that humbles herself and gives him that title, that messianic title, Lord, Son of David. And what happens here? She cries out, tells Jesus what's going on. Her daughter is tormented by a demon, and Jesus ignores her. But Jesus doesn't send her away. Jesus doesn't say, "Hey, out of here, woman." He just ignores her. And then it's the disciples that say, "Tell her to get out of here." So then Jesus replies. Jesus says, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And what Jesus is referring to is he's one of the prophecies of the Messiah to come would be to gather the tribes of Israel, because in 586 with the Babylonian exile, the tribes were decimated. The 10 northern tribes were split up and scattered throughout, and you had the 2 southern tribes. And one of the prophecies of the Messiah would be to come and gather the tribes of Israel. So as we know, even as far back as the book of Genesis, God's promise to Abraham was that all nations would be blessed. But for now, Jesus' mission as Messiah is not to the Gentiles. It is to the lost tribes of the house of Israel. And we even know this through Paul's writing. Paul says that salvation is first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. So Jesus is just following the plan of the Father and going in this sequence, this divine order, to restore the house of Israel first, then it would go to the Gentiles. And after Jesus, the cross, the death, the resurrection of Jesus, then what does Jesus say to his apostles? Go to all nations, and behold, I am with you always. So the gospel will go to the Gentiles, just not yet. And then look at her response when Jesus says, I didn't come for you right now, lady. I came just to restore Israel. And then she says, Lord, help me. She just cries this little prayer. Lord, I don't understand it all maybe, but I need your help. And I believe that you can help me. And then Jesus says, it is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs. Wow, that seems a little rude. And obviously here the children represent Israel and the dogs represent the Gentiles. And that's kind of how it was. But, you know, in this text, we don't see, like eyes or sign language or the context in which Jesus would have said it. You know, maybe I heard Dr. Mary Healy say that she believes that Jesus said this with a twinkle in his eye, something that told her to keep persisting, keep asking. And I think we're going to come to that conclusion at the end. But she comes back with this witty comment, says, please, Lord, even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the master's table. She again replies with this great act of humility, and she persists. And because of her persistent asking and begging and humility and faith and hope in Jesus, she gets to taste salvation in advance. Because salvation has not yet come to the Gentiles, but she gets to taste it in advance. Because remember, salvation, Jesus is salvation. And he would go to the Gentiles through his body, the church, after his death and resurrection. But because of her faith, because of her humility, and because of her persistence, she gets to taste this salvation in advance. And I think a few things we can take away from this reading is that sometimes, like the woman, we might feel ignored by God, ignored by Jesus, that our prayers are falling on deaf ears. And maybe the Lord is just testing our faith. He's seeing how willing we are to persevere and to persist in asking and seeking and knocking and to persist that and to trust that the Lord hears our prayers and our prayers are effective and that the Lord loves us and wills our good always, right? And that's something that we need to persist in and we need to have faith in. And she essentially becomes a model for prayer for us. She comes with faith, believing that Jesus is who he says he is. She trusts in Jesus. She has confidence in that he can do something about her problem with her daughter. And she also comes with great humility. And I think this is so key because so many times we go to prayer kind of with this, like we deserve something, like God owes us something. And that's not at all the case. Jesus comes with mercy, and mercy is undeserved. And she almost knows this. Maybe because she's a Canaanite, maybe because her ancestors violently opposed the kingdom of God, maybe she knows that maybe her life, we don't know. But it's almost like she knows she doesn't deserve it. And she comes with this humility that even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the master's table. And the truth of the matter is, because of our sin, because of our rebellion, because of our lack of faith, we don't deserve anything. Yet the Lord, in his mercy, gives us everything. He gives us everything. And sometimes he just wants us to trust him. And sometimes he might be slower than we think. And sometimes our prayers aren't answered because they're actually not good for us. Again, I've used this example so many times, but just because a child asks their parents for many things, the parent's not going to give the child everything because not everything is good for the child. And the parent knows that and the child doesn't. So out of love for the child, they don't receive what they're asking for. But what struck me in my own prayer life is a few things on the persistence of prayer. And that following this lady, she asked until she got an answer. And I think of St. Paul crying out, Lord, about the thorn in his flesh. Lord, I prayed to the Lord, remove this from me. 3 times I prayed, Paul said. But the Lord finally replied, I'm not going to do it for you, Paul. My grace is sufficient for you. So Paul received an answer of no. So not every single one of our prayers is going to be answered the way we want it to be. But Paul prayed. He prayed 3 times. So he prayed persistently. He prayed over and over. And sometimes it's going to take us a lot more than 3. It took St. Monica 20-some years, 18 years, 25 years, whatever it is, to pray for the conversion of her son, St. Augustine. And I imagine she cried out to the Lord daily. So not everything is going to happen in the time we want or the way we want. But I would say this, the Lord tells us to ask, to seek, to knock. We have that parable of the persistent widow in the Gospels. So I think the Lord wants us to persist in prayer, to keep asking, to keep knocking, to keep seeking, until one of 3 things happen. Either we get the prayer answered, the Lord says no, or the situation might change and that we don't find the need to even pray about this. Sometimes I find myself praying for something and I don't necessarily get a yes or no, but life situation changes and I find myself not praying that anymore. It maybe isn't as important to me as it once was. But for things that are on our heart, like this lady and her daughter, she wasn't going to forget about that. That was going to be something that she knew she needed help with. So let us take this lady, this great Canaanite woman, as a model for our prayer, that we would be persistent in our faith, that we would come to Jesus with confidence, knowing that he can change things at the snap of a finger, with humility, knowing that we don't deserve anything. And the Lord doesn't owe us anything, but in his great grace and love and mercy, he wants to give us everything. So let us finally cry out with this woman, Lord, help me. Please pray for me as I pray for you, and may God bless you and have a great week.